This story starts with an unimaginable tragedy, but it's really about what happens after all the headlines fade. It's about the hunt for answers when the main person responsible is gone, and the search for accountability that follows the path of a single object, the gun.
And that's the big question here, isn't it? When the person who pulls the trigger can't be put on trial, where does the pursuit of justice even go from there? What happens next?
All right, so to really get what's going on, we have to start with the horrific event that set all of this in motion. It happened in what was, until then, a quiet neighborhood in Shreveport, Louisiana.
On April 19, 2026, a truly terrible mass shooting took place. And the victims? They were 8 children, just 3 to 11 years old. It was an absolutely devastating loss for the entire community.
Now, the shooter, a man named Shamar Elkins, was killed by police right after the attack. And this, right here, created a huge problem for prosecutors. With the perpetrator gone, the most direct path to justice was closed. There was never going to be a trial for him. So, investigators had to widen their lens and start asking a totally different set of questions.
And you know what? That new way of thinking got results. And it got them fast. I mean, look at this timeline. The shooting happens on April 19th. The shooter's dead the same day. But what's really wild is that just 2 days later, on April 21st, federal charges were filed. But not against the shooter, against someone else entirely.
Okay, so this is where the whole story just pivots. The investigation became this kind of forensic journey, tracing the history of the one piece of evidence that could still tell a story, the weapon itself.
So the gun in question was a Mossberg 715P, a .22 caliber firearm. For law enforcement, this gun basically became the main character in a whole new investigation. Their job was to meticulously trace its path backwards, all the way from the crime scene.
And this lays out the gun's entire journey. So let's walk through it. First, investigators found out it was bought legally. Second, it was given to a man named Charles Ford, who happens to be a convicted felon, just to hold on to. Third, Ford apparently kept it unsecured, right under the seat of his truck. Fourth, the shooter, Shamar Elkins, who often rode in that truck, is believed to have stolen it. And finally, step 5, it was used in the attack. Every single one of these links became a crucial part of the investigation.
In that chain of custody, that path led federal agents to focus on one person in particular, a person whose story just didn't add up.
So the investigation zeroed in on this guy, 56-year-old Charles Ford. And here is the absolute legal key to this whole case. As a convicted felon, Ford was completely prohibited by federal law from having a gun. Any gun. For any reason. Period.
When the feds first questioned him, Ford apparently denied everything, said he never had the weapon. But as they kept talking, his story started to change. He eventually admitted that, yeah, he did keep the gun under the seat of his truck. That inconsistency, that first lie to federal agents, that was a critical mistake.
So that alleged false statement, on top of the illegal possession of the weapon in the first place, was more than enough to trigger some really serious federal consequences.
And on April 21st, again just 2 days after the shooting, Charles Ford was charged with 2 federal crimes. First, for being a felon in possession of a firearm, and second, for making false statements to federal agents while they were investigating.
So what does that actually mean for him? Well, for the firearm possession charge alone, the maximum potential sentence is up to 15 years in federal prison. And that's not all. On top of that, the charge of making a false statement carries its own maximum potential sentence, an additional 5 years.
But for the authorities and for the whole Shreveport community, these charges really represent something bigger than just punishment for one person. It's about sending a message and trying to find some kind of justice in the middle of all this tragedy.
Listen to how the U.S. Attorney for the district, Zachary Keller, put it. He basically said, look, we know we'll never see the shooter face justice. But the hope here is that by holding the person whose gun was used accountable, it might provide, in his words, some small bit of solace. It's really about pursuing accountability, even if it's one step removed.
And local law enforcement sees this as part of a much larger strategy. Shreveport Police Corporal Chris Bordelin was incredibly direct about it. He said they're going to use every tool they have to find anyone who helped buy or transfer a crime gun. His words were blunt. We're going to hold them accountable and we're going to put them in prison. The message couldn't be clearer. Responsibility extends up the chain.
So this entire case, which was born from such an unthinkable tragedy, ultimately leaves all of us grappling with a much broader and frankly, much more complex question.
It forces us to ask, when a crime is committed, how far does that responsibility truly extend?